So let's dive into one of the most powerful stories ever told, the life of Mary. But we're going to look at her as more than just a figure in a book. We're going to see her as a mother on this unbelievable journey, one filled with faith, yes, but also with unimaginable sorrow.
And this quote right here, it just gets to the absolute heart of it all. This isn't some simple fairy tale. It's a journey where the highest of highs and the lowest of lows are completely tangled together. And that's really the core of the story we're going to explore. Okay, so our story begins in about the most humble place you can imagine, a stable in Bethlehem. Mary has just given birth to her son Jesus and laid him in a manger. And when these shepherds show up telling a wild story about angels, she doesn't make a big scene. Instead, the scripture says she just treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. This quiet, thoughtful nature, it's going to be a key part of who she is. About 40 days later, Mary and Joseph take their son to the temple in Jerusalem for a dedication ceremony, as was the custom. And there, they run into this elderly prophet, a man named Simeon. He's overjoyed, saying this baby is the Messiah everyone's been waiting for. But then, he turns to Mary with a warning. Wow, just imagine that. In this moment of pure joy and dedication, Simeon drops these chilling words on her. It's a prophecy, a prediction of a sorrow so deep, so painful, that it would feel like an actual sword piercing her soul. That's some heavy foreshadowing. And you know what? That sorrow didn't take long to arrive. King Herod gets word of a newborn king, and he completely loses it. The family gets a warning in a dream and has to flee in the middle of the night. They become refugees in Egypt. This escape is what's known as the first of Mary's 7 sorrows. So right from the start, her motherhood is tied to danger and survival. So after Herod dies, the family can finally go home, and they settle down in Nazareth. And it's here, in the quiet, everyday life of this small village, that Mary does her most important work as a mom, far away from all the prophecies and angry kings. Now this is what I find so fascinating. Her home was basically his first school. She would have been the one to teach him his first prayers from the Psalms, helped him memorize the core Jewish creed, the Shema, and told him all the secret stories of their people. This painting here by Henry Ossawa Tanner just beautifully captures that idea of them studying together. She built his entire spiritual foundation. All right, so fast forward a bit, Jesus is 12 years old, and something happens that is literally every parent's worst nightmare. They're in Jerusalem for the annual Passover festival, and he goes missing. For 3 days. Can you imagine the panic? The scripture calls it great anxiety, which has to be the understatement of the year. And where do they finally find him? In the temple, debating scripture with the most brilliant teachers in the city, who were just blown away by his wisdom. What a moment of relief, but also what a clue that her son was on a path that was going to be way beyond her control. And as Jesus grows up and begins his public ministry, you can just feel that tension ratcheting up. Mary is watching all of this unfold with this mix of a mother's pride, of course, but also this growing sense of dread. That sword Simeon talked about, yeah, it's starting to feel very, very real.
So early on, they're at a wedding in a town called Cana, and the hosts run out of wine, which back then was a huge social disaster. And it's Mary who steps in. She just turns to Jesus and with total confidence tells the servants, do whatever he tells you. Think about that. She was the one who pushed him into his first public miracle. She understood his power before anyone else had a clue.
Now, there's this moment where someone tells Jesus his mother is outside waiting for him, and he asks, "Who is my mother?" and then points to his disciples. At first, that might sound a little harsh, right? But it wasn't a rejection of her at all. It was bigger than that. He was making a point that there's a new kind of family, a spiritual family built on faith. And Mary, well, she was its very first member. And now the journey takes its darkest turn. We're back in Jerusalem for the last Passover of Jesus' life. It's here that the prophecy given to a young mother in the temple all those years ago is about to be fulfilled in the most terrible way possible. According to tradition, Mary wasn't there in the garden when Jesus was arrested. She was staying somewhere nearby. Imagine her, just waiting, when suddenly the disciples burst in, totally breathless and terrified, with the news they've taken him. Armed guards just seized him. And in that one awful moment, hearing her son had been violently taken, everything clicks into place. Simeon's words from decades ago come rushing back. The prophecy was no longer some vague future threat. The sword had finally and brutally pierced her soul. What came next was just this rapid, horrific chain of events. The arrest, a sham trial, the condemnation. Then, that agonizing walk through the streets to the place of execution, Calvary. And through all of it, Mary refused to leave him. She followed him every single step of the way.
And when she reached the site of the crucifixion, she didn't collapse. She didn't run away in horror. The Gospel of John uses one simple, incredibly powerful word to describe what she did at the foot of the cross. She stood. Just stood there. A pillar of strength and love when everything else was falling apart.
Even in his own agony up on that cross, Jesus sees her standing there, and he speaks to her. He entrusts her care to his most beloved disciple, John. It was this final, tender act of a son's love, that constant intertwining of love and suffering, that defined her entire life. And so she stayed. She watched him take his last breath. She shared in his suffering with every fiber of her being, right until the very, very end. After his body was taken down from the cross, tradition says it was placed in her arms. This moment, known as the Pietà, captured so famously by Michelangelo, is just a devastating bookend to her journey as a mother. The very same arms that cradled him as a tiny infant in Bethlehem were now holding his broken, lifeless body. But her story doesn't end there, in all that sorrow and darkness. After the resurrection, Mary's role continued, solidifying her legacy not just as Jesus' mother, but as his first and most faithful follower. Across Christianity, she's seen in different ways. The Orthodox call her Theotokos, the God-bearer. Catholics honor her as Our Lady of Sorrows. Protestants admire her as a model of humble faith. But you know what the common thread is? The one thing everyone agrees on? They all see her as the ultimate example of trusting God no matter what. I mean, when you just step back and look at the whole arc of her life, it's breathtaking. She was probably just a teenager when this all started. She became a refugee, dealt with the anxiety of raising this extraordinary child, and then had to endure the trauma of watching him be executed. And through it all, she acted with such grace. So it leaves us with this final question to think about. We usually think of strength as, power or fighting back. But what does Mary's story, the story of a mother's love tested to its absolute limit, really tell us about what it means to be strong? Maybe it's something else entirely. Maybe it's about faith and love and the courage to just stand.